A simple act of kindness in a busy restaurant changes the lives of a lonely billionaire's daughter and a struggling waitress forever. The city was full of tall glass towers, shining cars, and men in dark suits who always walked fast with phones in their hands. Among them was one man who seemed to have everything people usually dream of. His name was Richard. People called him a billionaire, a genius businessman, and even a man who could turn anything he touched into gold. He owned companies spread across countries. His face often appeared in newspapers and magazines, and when he walked into a room, people stood up to greet him with respect. From the outside, it looked like Richard had built the perfect life. Had money, power, and influence, and many people thought he must be the happiest man alive. But behind those strong walls of his mansion and away from the cameras, Richard's life was not as perfect as it seemed. Richard had one daughter, Emily. She was the light of his world, the only reason he worked as hard as he did. Emily was born with a disability that made her childhood different from most children her age. She couldn't run around freely in the park, couldn't join the other kids in school activities, and often needed extra care just to manage her day. For Richard, this was not a weakness. Emily was his pride, his heart, and his reason to wake up every morning. Yet no matter how much he tried, could never ignore the truth that his daughter often felt isolated from the world. When Emily was born, doctors had told Richard and his wife about her condition. At first, Richard believed that with enough money, he could fix everything. He hired the best doctors, flew across the world to consult specialists, and filled his home with the latest equipment. If someone mentioned a new treatment, he made sure Emily had access to it immediately. If there was a special school, he paid whatever fee they asked. But no matter how much he spent, there was one thing money couldn't buy: emotional warmth, the kind that comes from simple human connection. Emily needed not just care but understanding, not just treatment, but love that saw beyond her disability. And this was the part Richard often struggled with. He loved his daughter deeply, but he was not good with emotions. He had spent years learning the language of business deals, contracts, and negotiations. He could sit across a table with powerful men and convince them to invest millions, but when it came to his little girl's tears, he often felt helpless. He didn't always know the right words to say or the right way to hold her. Sometimes he would see her looking out of the window, watching other children play. And though his chest tightened with pain, he would quietly turn away because he didn't know how to comfort her. In those moments, he felt more powerless than ever. His wife had tried to fill this gap, but life had its cruel turns. After years of standing beside him, she passed away suddenly, leaving Richard alone to raise Emily. That day, Richard's world collapsed. All the wealth and success he had built seemed meaningless compared to the emptiness that followed her absence. Emily was only 7 years old at the time, and losing her mother made her even more fragile. Richard promised himself he would never let his daughter feel abandoned. He became both a father and a mother to her, even though deep down he knew he could never replace the warmth his wife once gave. Life inside their mansion was lonely. The big halls, the expensive chandeliers, the polished marble floors, all of it meant nothing to Emily. She would sometimes sit in her room filled with toys she never touched, looking like a little bird trapped inside a golden cage. Came and went, professionals trained to handle children with special needs. They did their jobs well, but none of them stayed for long. For them, Emily was just part of their duty, and though they were kind, Emily could feel the difference. What she longed for was someone who would laugh with her, play with her, and hold her, not because it was their job, but because they truly cared. Richard noticed this every day. He noticed it in the way Emily smiled less, in the way she kept quiet. During family dinners, in the way she sometimes refused to speak to the new caretakers. He noticed it when she refused to play with the expensive dolls he brought her, when she sat by the window in silence, or when she looked at him with eyes that asked questions he couldn't answer. He wanted to fix it, but he didn't know how. No money could fill that space. And that helplessness broke him from the inside. Every morning, Richard would dress in his perfectly tailored suit, get into his luxury car, and head to his office. But before leaving, he always stopped by Emily's room. Sometimes she was awake, sometimes still asleep. He would kiss her forehead gently, promising himself that everything he was doing out in the world was for her. Yet deep inside, he feared he was failing her. He feared she would grow up remembering not the comfort of love, but the coldness of wealth that could never embrace her. At work, Richard wore a different mask. His colleagues saw him as a man who never lost focus, who could strike million-dollar deals without hesitation. His competitors envied him, his employees admired him, and the media praised him. But whenever his phone buzzed with a message from home, his heart skipped a beat. Was Emily okay? Did she smile today? Would she ask for him? And too often the answer left him feeling guilty. Emily had asked for him. But he was in a meeting, or on a plane, or signing another contract. The more he succeeded in the business world, the more he felt like he was losing the battle at home. At night, after the city grew quiet, Richard often found himself sitting in his daughter's room, watching her sleep. The machines beside her hummed softly, monitoring her health. Her tiny hands rested gently on her blanket, her face calm in dreams. In those moments he felt both proud and broken. Proud that she was his daughter, proud of her strength, proud of her ability to smile even when life gave her so many reasons to cry. But broken because he couldn't give her what she needed the most. He could protect her from the outside world. But he couldn't protect her from the loneliness inside her heart. There were times when Richard remembered his own childhood. He had grown up in a small house with very little money. His parents had struggled to put food on the table, but one thing he always had was love. His mother's warm hugs, his father's encouraging words. The simple family dinners where laughter echoed even when the plates were half empty. That love had carried him through the hardest times. And now, as he looked at his daughter sleeping in a bed worth thousands of dollars, surrounded by things he never had, he realized she didn't have the one thing that mattered most, the warmth of human connection he once received so freely. The irony cut through him like a knife. Richard's days became a battle between two worlds. In one, he was a powerful billionaire, admired by everyone. The other, he was a father struggling to give his little girl the simple comfort of love. He often asked himself if he was doing enough, if he was being the father she deserved. Daughter never complained, never blamed him, but her silence spoke louder than words. And in that silence, Richard felt the weight of all his failures. He knew he couldn't go on like this forever. Something had to change. He needed to find a way to give Emily what money couldn't buy. He didn't know how or when it would happen, but deep down, he held on to hope that one day, someone or something would enter their lives and bring the warmth his daughter needed so badly. He didn't know it yet, but life was preparing to surprise him in ways he never imagined. The days in Richard's life continued with the same rhythm. The balance between boardrooms and hospital visits, between the public image of a strong businessman and the private reality of a lonely father. Emily had grown used to her routine, though the spark of excitement that should have been part of a child's life was missing. Richard noticed it more with each passing day, and though he tried to cheer her up with gifts, surprises, and new caretakers, nothing seemed to touch her heart. Her laughter had become rare, almost like a forgotten melody. One evening, after a particularly long and exhausting day, Richard made a decision. He did not want Emily to spend the night sitting at home with another hired caretaker while he buried himself in work. For once, he wanted to be with her outside the confines of their house. The thought was simple: a quiet dinner, just the two of them, away from business meetings and the cold silence of the mansion. It was a small attempt to connect with her, to make her feel like she was his priority. So, instead of calling his driver to take them to one of the luxury restaurants where he was a regular guest, Richard decided to stop at a small family restaurant. On the corner of a busy street, it was nothing fancy, no valet service, no grand chandeliers, no tables covered with silk cloths, just a cozy place where people came with their families to enjoy simple food and warm company. Richard had not stepped into such a place for years, but something inside him told him this was exactly the kind of environment Emily needed. When they walked in, the smell of fresh food filled the air, and soft laughter echoed from different tables. Richard noticed how different this was from the stiff and formal places he usually dined at. There was no one wearing expensive watches or talking about stock prices here. Instead, there were families sharing pizzas, parents wiping sauce from their children's cheeks, and waiters moving quickly with trays, their faces lit with genuine smiles. Emily, sitting in her wheelchair beside him, looked around with wide eyes. For the first time in a long while, she seemed curious rather than withdrawn. They were guided to a corner table. Richard ordered some food, not knowing if Emily would even feel like eating. She was restless, fidgeting with her fingers, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She never liked unfamiliar places, and he could see the discomfort growing in her. Richard leaned down, trying to calm her. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll just have dinner and go home," he said softly. But Emily's anxiety was building. She began to shift in her chair. Her breathing quickened, and Richard's chest tightened with helplessness. When had seen this before her episodes when the world around her felt too overwhelming, just as Richard began to worry that they would have to leave before even touching their food. A young waitress appeared at their table. She looked no older than her mid-20s, dressed in a simple uniform, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. There was nothing extraordinary about her at first glance, except for the warmth in her smile. She bent slightly to Emily's level, and, instead of addressing Richard like most adults did, she spoke directly to the little girl. "Hi there," she said gently, her voice soft like a melody. "I'm Lily. Would you like me to get you something special? Maybe some ice cream?" Emily stared at her, unsure how to respond. Most people usually ignored her or spoke over her, as though she couldn't understand. But this young woman was looking right into her eyes, waiting patiently for her answer. Richard noticed the shift immediately, only moments ago had been restless and anxious, had stilled. Her eyes softened, and though she didn't speak, her shoulders relaxed slightly. Lily didn't rush her. She knelt down beside Emily's chair, lowering herself to the child's level. "But you know," she continued, "I used to be scared of new places too. But then I discovered that every new place hides something yummy. Do you want to help me find it today?" Emily blinked, her lips twitching as though she wanted to smile. For Richard, it was a breathtaking sight, his daughter connecting with someone outside of her world so easily. He watched in silence, almost afraid to interrupt the moment. Lily stood and smiled at Richard briefly before heading off to bring some food. When she returned, she carried not only the dishes Richard had ordered, but also a small bowl of vanilla ice cream with colorful sprinkles on top. She placed it carefully in front of Emily. "This is our restaurant's secret treasure," she whispered, "and it's only for special guests like you." Emily's eyes lit up in a way Richard hadn't seen for years. She reached out slowly, her hands trembling, and tasted a spoonful. The tiniest giggle escaped her lips, and Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. This simple act of kindness from a stranger had done something he had been struggling to achieve for years. It had made his daughter smile. Throughout the evening, Lily kept checking in on them, but not in the usual rushed manner of waitresses who had too many tables to serve. She always took a moment to speak directly to Emily, asking her little questions, showing her folded napkin animals, and making her laugh with small jokes. Richard sat back, watching in awe. He couldn't remember the last time his daughter had looked this comfortable in public. As the restaurant grew busier, Lily continued serving other tables, but every time she passed by, she gave Emily a little wave or a smile. And each time, Emily responded with a tiny nod or a giggle. For Richard, the transformation was almost magical. He had taken his daughter out, expecting nothing more than a quiet dinner. But instead, he had witnessed something extraordinary. The beginning of a bond forming between his daughter and a young woman who didn't even know their story. When it was time to leave, Emily surprised him again. Usually she resisted change and disliked moving once she was comfortable, but this time when Richard told her they had to go, she looked at Lily and whispered softly, "Bye." It was just one word, but for a child who rarely spoke to strangers, it felt like a miracle. Richard felt tears prick his eyes as he watched Lily wave back with genuine affection. On the way home, Emily was different. She didn't sink back into silence as she usually did after outings. Instead, she hummed softly, holding on to the little paper napkin Lily had folded into the shape of a bird and given her before they left. Richard drove in silence, his heart full of emotions he couldn't put into words. Something had shifted tonight, and he knew it wasn't just chance. The next day, Emily asked a question that stunned him. She tugged at his sleeve in the morning and said, "Can we go back to the restaurant?" It was the first time in years that she had requested to go somewhere. Richard agreed without hesitation. And so, they returned. Over the next few weeks, visiting that little restaurant became a routine. Each time, Emily looked forward to seeing Lily, and each time, Lily welcomed her with the same warmth and kindness, never treating her differently, never making her feel out of place. Slowly, Emily's shyness began to fade when she was around Lily. She laughed more, she spoke more, and for the first time in a long while, she seemed like a child, enjoying life. Richard watched all of this unfold with quiet amazement. He had spent years trying to give his daughter the best of everything, but it was a simple waitress, with no training and special care, who had managed to reach her heart. Every time he saw Emily smile in Lily's presence, he felt both joy and humility. Perhaps love and understanding were more powerful than any luxury in the world. Richard didn't know it yet. But this unexpected encounter in a small restaurant was the beginning of a life-changing journey for him, for his daughter, and for the young woman who had unknowingly stepped into their lives with nothing but kindness in her heart. The visits to the small family restaurant had slowly become a tradition. What started as one evening of escape from the cold silence of the mansion turned into a ritual Emily looked forward to. Every week, sometimes twice a week, Richard would take her there. At first, he thought she would grow bored of it quickly, but the opposite happened. Each visit made Emily happier, and every time she asked him, "When can we go again?" his heart melted. It was not the food that kept drawing her back. Emily never cared much about meals, and though she enjoyed the ice cream, it was clear the real reason she wanted to go was Lily. The young waitress had become more than just a friendly face at the restaurant. To Emily, she was someone special. Someone who made her feel seen. Someone who treated her not as a child with a disability, but simply as a little girl who deserved fun and laughter. For Richard, he had tried so hard for so many years to find the right caretakers, therapists, and companions for his daughter, but none of them had connected with her the way Lily did. It wasn't because Lily had professional training or special knowledge she didn't. It was because she had a genuine heart. Every time she spoke to Emily, it came from a place of honesty and warmth, and that was something money couldn't buy. One evening after another meal at the restaurant, Richard noticed something that shook him deeply. Emily was laughing with her whole face glowing, her eyes sparkling as she giggled at one of Lily's silly jokes. It was a sound he had almost forgotten. He had not heard such laughter since his wife was alive. For a brief moment, he saw in his daughter the carefree child she could have been if life had not placed such heavy burdens on her. His chest tightened, and he looked away quickly, afraid his emotions would spill out in front of everyone. That night, after tucking Emily into bed, Richard sat in his study, unable to focus on his papers. He kept thinking of Lily. Who was this? A young woman who could bring joy into his daughter's world so effortlessly? She was just a waitress in a small restaurant, working long hours for little pay. Yet she had given Emily something no one else had managed to give: a sense of belonging, a spark of happiness. The next time they visited, Richard decided to stay quieter than usual and simply observe. He watched how Emily's face lit up the moment Lily approached their table. He noticed how Lily knelt down every time she spoke to Emily, never towering over her, always meeting her eye to eye. He noticed how she was patient, waiting for Emily's slow responses, never rushing her, never finishing her sentences. He noticed how Emily reached out to show her drawings or toys, things she rarely shared with anyone. He realized this was not a passing connection. This was something real. After several visits, Richard decided to have a proper conversation with Lily. One evening, when Emily was happily eating her ice cream, he motioned for Lily to sit for a moment. She hesitated, looking around at the busy tables. But he assured her he would make sure it was fine. "I wanted to thank you," Richard began. His voice was steady, but carried a weight of sincerity he rarely used outside his home. "You've been very kind to my daughter. I don't think you realize what a difference you've made in her life." Lily smiled softly. "She's a wonderful little girl," she said simply. I don't know, I feel like she understands me. And I understand her. It's easy to care for someone when your heart just wants to." Her words struck him deeply. Most people saw Emily as a responsibility, a challenge, or a task to be managed. But this young woman saw her as a person, a child worthy of love and fun. There was no calculation, no hidden motives, just pure kindness. Over the weeks, Richard learned more about Lily. She lived with her younger brother and an elderly grandmother, working at the restaurant to support them.
Wow.
Her dreams of going to college had been pushed aside because she couldn't afford it, yet she carried no bitterness in her heart, worked hard, smiled through long shifts, and somehow still had the energy to give his daughter the attention she needed. The more he learned, the more Richard felt something stirring inside him. For years he had believed that wealth could solve every problem, that throwing money at an issue would make it disappear. But Lily's presence in Emily's life proved him wrong. She had nothing, no riches, no power, yet she gave his daughter more than he ever could. One evening, a turning point arrived. They had gone to the restaurant as usual, and Emily was in an unusually good mood. Chatting softly with Lily about the little napkin animals she had collected over the weeks, Richard watched them with quiet awe, and then, without planning it, he said to Lily, "Would you consider spending more time with Emily outside the restaurant?" Lily blinked in surprise. "Outside?" she repeated, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Yes," Richard continued. "She talks about you constantly. I can see how happy she is when she's around you. I know you already work long hours, but if you would ever be willing to spend some time with her, maybe as a companion, or even just a friend. Of course, make sure you are compensated." Lily looked at him, then at Emily, who was smiling expectantly as though she already knew the answer. For a moment, Lily hesitated. Her life was already complicated. She worked hard to support her family, and the idea of adding more responsibility should have scared her. But as she looked at Emily's hopeful eyes, she realized this wasn't just about responsibility, it was about love. "I'd love to," she said softly, and that was the beginning of something none of them could have predicted. From that day on, Lily began visiting the mansion on her days off. The first time she walked through the grand gates, she felt out of place, surrounded by wealth and luxury she had never known. But the moment she saw Emily's face light up at her arrival, all her nervousness disappeared. She sat with Emily, played games with her, read her stories, and took her out into the garden. Slowly, Emily began to blossom. Richard noticed the changes almost immediately. Emily spoke more, laughed more, and showed more interest in life. She no longer dreaded mornings but looked forward to them if she knew Lily was coming. Even her health seemed to improve, as though the joy she felt gave her strength. For Richard, these moments were overwhelming. He would often stand in the doorway, unseen, watching his daughter and Lily together. He watched Emily rest her head on Lily's shoulder, watched her giggle at silly jokes, watched her listen intently as Lily told her stories. And every time Richard felt a mix of gratitude and humility. Gratitude because someone had brought his daughter's spirit back to life. Humility because he realized that all his wealth had never achieved what this young woman's heart had done so naturally. The turning point was clear. Emily had found in Lily something she had been missing all her life, a true friend, a companion, who understood her. And Richard had found something too. He had discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, and that love, not money, is what truly heals. Life, he realized, had just changed forever. The days began to pass differently for Richard and Emily after Lily became part of their lives. What had once been a home filled with silence and routines now carried laughter, soft conversations, and the little joys that Emily had missed for so long. The mansion still looked as grand and cold as ever from the outside, but inside, in Emily's room or the sunlit garden, there was warmth. The sound of a child's giggle, the soft hum of Lily's voice reading a story, or the quiet comfort of Two people simply sitting together filled the spaces that once felt empty. For Richard, this change was more than he could have imagined. Every evening, after returning from his office, he would find Emily in better spirits than before. She was eager to tell him about the games she had played with Lily or the stories she had heard. Sometimes Richard would quietly step into the room and see them together before they noticed him. He often saw Emily leaning against Lily, holding her hand, or pointing to something excitedly as Lily listened with patient attention. Each of these moments felt priceless to him. It's more valuable than all the contracts he signed or the millions he earned. But with this joy also came a growing realization. Richard could see that Lily was working far too hard. She would come straight from her long shifts at the restaurant, often looking tired but still managing to smile for Emily. He noticed the faint dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion, and yet she never once complained. She always gave Emily her full attention, as though nothing else in the world mattered. One evening, after Lily left, Richard sat alone in his study, thought about everything he had observed. This young woman had transformed his daughter's life. Yet her own life was a constant struggle. He had overheard her once telling Emily about her younger brother's school and how she wanted him to have a better future than she did. He had also heard about her grandmother, who was old and sick, and how Lily worried about the medical bills. She carried so much weight on her shoulders, yet she never let that pain show when she was with Emily. Richard leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. He was a man used to making decisions that affected thousands of people, entire companies, and massive fortunes. But this decision felt more personal and more important than any business deal. He knew he couldn't stand by and watch Lily struggle when she had given his daughter something no amount of money had ever achieved. The next time Lily visited, Richard asked her to stay for tea after Emily had gone to bed. She looked surprised, almost nervous, but agreed. They sat in the large living room, the flickering firelight softening the atmosphere. For a while, there was silence, and Richard studied her carefully. She looked small in the grand leather chair, out of place in the luxury of his home. Her uniform was plain, her shoes worn, but her presence carried more dignity than any rich guest he had ever entertained. "I wanted to talk to you," Richard began slowly. "You've done more for my daughter than anyone else ever has. You've brought her happiness. You've brought her back to life in ways I thought were impossible. And for that, I owe you more than words can ever express." Lily shifted uncomfortably, shaking her head. "You don't owe me anything. Emily is a wonderful child. I just care about her, that's all." "But it is more than that," Richard insisted gently. "You've given her something I couldn't. You've given her love, patience, and joy. I've spent years trying to fill her world with everything money could buy, and yet nothing worked until you came along." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want you to just be a visitor in her life. I want you to be a part of it." Lily looked startled. "A part of it? What do you mean?" Richard continued, "that I want to give you an opportunity. You don't need to work long hours at the restaurant anymore. You don't need to exhaust yourself just to make ends meet. I want you to come work for me. Better yet, I want you to be with Emily as her companion, her caretaker, her friend. I'll make sure you're paid more than you ever earned before. I'll support your education if you still want to study. I'll help with your brother's schooling, your grandmother's care, whatever you need. You've given my daughter a future. Let me give you one in return." For a long moment, Lily was silent. She stared at him, her eyes wide, her lips parted. In shock, it was clear she had not expected this. In her world, opportunities like these did not simply appear. She had spent years working tirelessly, pushing aside her own dreams to survive. And now here was a man offering her everything she had ever wished for, not as charity, but as recognition of her worth. I don't know what to say," she whispered at last. "This is too much. I'm just a waitress. I don't deserve all of this." Richard leaned forward, his gaze firm but kind. "You're not just anything. You're the reason my daughter smiles. That's worth more than all the money in the world. Don't think of this as something you don't deserve. Think of it as something you've earned because you have." Tears filled Lily's eyes. She looked down at her hands, struggling to process everything. Part of her wanted to accept immediately. Part of her was afraid. What if she failed? If she wasn't good enough? What if stepping into this world of wealth and luxury created a distance she couldn't handle? But then she thought of Emily. She thought of the way the little girl looked at her, the way she laughed, the way she held her hand tightly as if she never wanted to let go. Finally, Lily nodded slowly. If this is truly what you want, then, yes, I would be honored. Richard felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in years, he felt he had made a decision not just as a businessman, but as a father. He had chosen something not for profit or power, but for love. The weeks that followed were life-changing for all of them. Lily left her job at the restaurant and began working full-time in Richard's household. At first, she was overwhelmed by the grandness of it, all the size of the rooms, the number of staff, the endless wealth surrounding her. But she quickly realized that her true place was not in the glittering halls, but right beside Emily. She organized little activities for the girl art projects, storytelling sessions, and games in the garden. She even introduced her to music, teaching her simple songs and watching her face glow as she tried to sing along. Richard often joined them, sometimes awkwardly at first. But with Lily's encouragement, he learned how to play small games with his daughter, how to laugh without feeling self-conscious, how to let go of the weight of his responsibilities, if only for an hour. And just as Richard had promised, he began to support Lily in her own life. He enrolled her brother in a good school, covered her grandmother's medical expenses, and even arranged for Lily to take evening classes so she could continue her education. But what touched Lily the most was that he never treated it like charity. He always said the same thing: "This is not a gift. This is an investment in someone who has already given me the greatest return." The bond between Emily and Lily grew deeper with every passing day. They were no longer just a child and her caretaker. They were like sisters, inseparable and full of trust. Emily blossomed under Lily's care, becoming more confident, more expressive, and more alive. And Richard, watching from the side, felt his heart heal slowly. For years he had lived with guilt and helplessness, but now he finally saw hope. What began as a simple encounter in a small restaurant had turned into a life-changing decision that reshaped all their futures. For Emily, it meant love and companionship. For Lily, it meant a chance to dream again. And for Richard, it meant peace, the peace of knowing his daughter was finally surrounded by the kind of care that no money alone could buy. Life slowly settled into a rhythm that none of them had expected. The mansion, once a place of echoing silence, was now filled with the gentle noise of life. Emily's laughter often floated down the halls. Lily's soft voice could be heard, singing or telling stories, and even Richard found himself drawn into the warmth that had grown inside his home. What once felt like a lonely fortress of wealth now felt like a home full of light. Emily's world had transformed completely. She no longer woke up with the same dull routine, but instead with excitement about what she and Lily would do together. Some mornings they painted on the terrace, the walls covered with colorful strokes of imagination. Other days, Lily would take her outside into the garden, where they built small houses with twigs or sat under the old oak tree making up stories about clouds that looked like animals. For a child who had once lived in the shadow of silence and isolation every day, now carried the sweetness of discovery and friendship. Richard noticed these changes with awe. His daughter's health seemed steadier, her mood brighter, her eyes more alive. She no longer looked out of the window longingly, but instead looked forward to every day. She even began to interact more with him, sharing small details about her. Time with Lily, pulling his hand to join in a game, or asking him to sit with them during story time. For a father who had spent years feeling like a stranger to his own child's heart, these moments were priceless. But Emily was not the only one whose future had been rewritten. Lily's life, too, began to change in ways she had never dreamed of. With Richard's support, she was able to quit the endless double shifts at the restaurant. She finally had time to rest, to study, and to care for her family without constantly worrying about money. Her younger brother thrived in his new school, something she had always wanted for him but could never afford. Her grandmother received proper medical treatment and no longer suffered quietly as she had before. For the first time in years, Lily felt the heavy weight on her shoulders lift. And yet, despite these blessings, what mattered most to her was not the money or the opportunities, but Emily. The little girl had become like family to her. She remembered the first time Emily had spoken her name, the first time she had laughed in her arms, the first time she had whispered, "Don't go." Those moments were treasures far greater than anything wealth could give. Lily often thought about how one small encounter in a restaurant had changed the entire direction of her life. Richard, too, had changed. He was no longer just the cold, sharp businessman who measured success in numbers and deals. Being around Lily and Emily taught him to slow down, to see life not just in terms of achievements, but in terms of moments. He began leaving the office earlier, spending evenings at home instead of buried in meetings. He joined them in their activities, sometimes awkwardly, but always with sincerity. When Emily wanted to paint, he dipped his brush clumsily into colors. When she wanted to sing, he hummed along even if he was out of tune. And when she wanted to play, he forgot his age and his pride and simply became her playmate. For Richard, this was healing. He had spent so many years haunted by guilt, the guilt of not being enough for his daughter, the guilt of failing to comfort her, the guilt of hiding behind wealth when she needed love. But now, watching Emily flourish, he felt that guilt slowly fade. He realized he was finally becoming the father she needed. The community around them noticed the change too. Once Richard had been seen as a distant, untouchable man, respected, but feared. Now, those who interacted with him saw a softer side. He was still powerful, still sharp in business, but there was warmth in his voice when he spoke of his daughter. There was humility when he spoke of the young woman who had helped change their lives. People were surprised, but those who knew the story admired him for recognizing the value of kindness over wealth. As months passed, the bond between the three of them deepened into something unbreakable. Richard often thought of it as fate that life had led them into that small restaurant on that ordinary evening, and that Lily had appeared at just the right moment. He sometimes wondered how different things would have been if he had gone somewhere else that night. The thought frightened him, because it reminded him of how close he had been to missing this gift. One evening, as the sun set in golden hues across the garden, Richard sat watching Emily and Lily chase bubbles. The little girl's laughter rang out like music, and Lily's own laughter blended with it, creating a harmony so pure that Richard felt tears sting his eyes. He thought of his late wife, of the promise he had made to never let their daughter feel abandoned, and he whispered quietly into the fading light, "I kept my promise." He knew then that their future was secure not because of his wealth, but because of the love that now surrounded his daughter. He had once believed money could fix everything. Now he understood that it was people, with their kindness and compassion, who truly made life worth living. Lily's future, too, unfolded in beautiful ways. With Richard's encouragement, she began to dream again. She took classes, studied late at night after Emily had gone to bed, slowly worked toward a degree she had once thought impossible. But no matter how busy she became, she never let her bond with Emily weaken. She balanced everything with care, always making sure the little girl knew she was loved and cherished. Emily herself grew stronger. Her disability was still part of her life, but it no longer defined her. With Lily's support, she learned to face the world with courage. She even made new friends, something she had never dared before. Confidence blossomed, and with it came a light that touched everyone around her. Years later, when people looked at Emily, they no longer saw a fragile child trapped by her limitations. They saw a young girl full of spirit, joy, and hope. And when they asked how she had become so bright despite her challenges, she always spoke of two people: her father, who never gave up on her, and Lily, who had given her the love she once thought she would never find. For Lily, the story was just as miraculous. She had gone from being a waitress struggling to survive to becoming an essential part of a family that cherished her. She had gained stability, education, and opportunities. But more importantly, she had gained love. She often thought back to her first day meeting Emily, the nervous little girl in the corner of the restaurant. and marveled at how that single moment had shaped her destiny. Richard, looking back, knew he had been given a second chance at fatherhood. He knew that fate had sent Lily into their lives, not as an employee, not as a caretaker, but as a gift. He no longer measured his wealth in dollars, but in smiles, in laughter, in the bonds of love that surrounded him. His greatest treasure was not the empire he had built, but the family he had found in the most unexpected way. The story of the billionaire's daughter and the waitress was not one of charity or luck. It was a story of kindness meeting need, of love breaking through loneliness, of lives rewritten by the simplest of human connections. In the end, they each discovered that sometimes the greatest fortunes are not found in gold or success, but in the warmth of a heart that chooses to care. And so, their future was no longer a question mark filled with fear and uncertainty. It was a promise of love, of growth, and of shared dreams. A future none of them had dared to imagine, but one they were now living together.